Good day, Crime Talk aficionados. This is Scott Reisch. Today, there's only one thing on the docket, and that is someone that we told you that we would have. We have an interview with Chuck Leidner. He was one of the attorneys handling Ted Bundy's death penalty case here in the state of Colorado. I think you'll find it interesting because Chuck's opinion of Ted Bundy is really not that of the way he's been described by many people throughout the decades. So I hope you enjoy it. Please like the channel. Please subscribe. Please leave a comment. Have a great day. So today here on Crime Talk, we have with us a special guest. We have attorney Chuck Leidner. Chuck has been practicing for 50 plus years here in the state of Colorado. And I've known you for probably at least almost 15, 20 years.
I would say 15 years at least.
And, he's always been gracious to me when I was a young attorney. Was nice to me, gave me advice, told me when to shut up, I think on a couple of occasions, or what not to do. So I always appreciated that. And we had talked over the years, and I was at home one night, I think watching Netflix, couldn't sleep or something, and there was a show about Ted Bundy on there. I think it was the Ted Bundy tapes, maybe one of those. And next thing you know, I'm like, I know that man. It's Chuck Leidner.
The white-haired guy with, yeah.
And I thought, I'm like, how did I not know that you had represented Ted Bundy? I mean, you don't go around telling everybody. I didn't know about it, but once I knew about it, I reached out to you. You were gracious enough to come and talk with us today, but we'll talk about that in just a second. But why don't you just give a quick little bio of you? I mean, where'd you go to school? What have you done for your legal career?
It's amazing I can remember that far back. I went to DU back in 1965. And started practicing in 1969. Joined the Public Defender's Office in January of 1970. In my memory serves me right, I was the last person hired for the Denver trial office, and only because Tom Van Cleve went to the appellate office. Stayed with the Public Defender's Office in Denver, moved to Glenwood Springs, Public Defender in the 9th Judicial District, as well as Eagle County, which is the 5th Judicial District, for a few years. And I was appointed district attorney by then Governor Lamb after the prior district attorney was convicted for misappropriation of public funds, and stayed in the public defense or the DA's office. I stayed there one election, one re-election, and left after, I guess it was 3 years because of some issues that had arisen. And moved back down here. Been in private practice here since 1981.
Wow. So the Public Defender's Office in 1970, and obviously Colorado has one of the best public defender systems in the nation. You were one of the, when they first kind of opened that office, right? The full statewide system?
The statewide system. Prior to that time, Denver had a public defender's office. Adams County had a public defender's office. And I'm not sure who else at that time. I just knew those two specifically. Raleigh Rogers was the first public defender, and he pretty much ran the thing a very tight ship for, I think it was probably 7 or 8 years, maybe a little bit more than that. And it was a good office. We I think, over the course of time, compelled respect from police department in Denver, from the DA's office in Denver, although that was a less difficult thing. The cops really just despised us for many years.
Sure. Well, you must have been doing your job.
Yeah, really, really pissed them off.
Yeah, but as well as I do. I mean, I've had officers that, you cross-examine aggressively, and afterwards they come up and they shake your hand and say, nothing personal. I think you just made me a better police officer. I won't make that mistake again. And then you have others that just completely cannot imagine somebody questioning what they did and their authority whatsoever.
There was one cop I remember named Don DeNovelis, who was a vice narcotics guy, and he was just the penultimate gentleman. You know, he was next to the best there was, and just a delightful guy, and was always very friendly and very nice. Never lied in court, never misspoke, always prepared. And it's like, you don't, as a defense lawyer, you don't have to be a jerk towards them because they are so upfront about things. You know, and you run across those people. You come across those people. I know you've had dealings with an investigator in the DA's office. I don't know if he's still there or not, named Kent Prose.
Sure. Yeah, know Kent very well.
You know, Kent, if Kent says it's snowing outside, you don't have to go look because you know it's snowing outside. And I've run across people like that over the years, and I use his name only because I always found him to be just the nicest, most honest, forthright person in the world.
Yeah, I've had many dealings with Ken Prose over the years, the economic crime unit investigator. And like you said, if he said he had your guy or your woman, he probably did. Yeah. And like I said, you didn't have to go back and check the numbers. It was all there and then some. So yeah. So DU 1965. Was that when the law school was still downtown?
We were downtown on the corner. The four corners of the park. The art museum was just being built. The city and county building on the other corner.
Yeah. When I went to school, I was out at the old women's college, which is now a culinary school. Yeah. Because they built that big, fancy new campus over there. I've still yet to actually be in the new law school after 25 years.
That was a nice location. I liked that location. Downtown was interesting only because on any given day you could walk over to the courthouse and see what was going on. I mean, Friday afternoon in courtroom J, the one that faces the Mint, was referred to as nuts and sluts. It was the prostitutes and the other little crazy crap that was going on those days.
Sure, the kind of municipal court docket of everyone that got picked up. Everybody's been to like I said, it's the nuts and sluts docket. The homeless people, the people with mental health, and the judges talk to them like, "Oh, you're back again. Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a couple days in jail so you can have a couple of hot meals and some showers and get cleaned up and send you on your way. And we'll see you next week."
Yeah.
That's an interesting docket there.
That was where I started. Zita Weinschenk was the judge in there.
Wow.
And that was where I started. It was a fun place. It was an educational place.
Yeah. So obviously, I mean, you've been practicing a long time. What's the biggest change that you think has taken place in the practice of law, specifically kind of, criminal defense, since that's what you've done most of your career?
Without substantive law issues, I mean, all this electronic stuff that's come into play is absolutely mind-blowing. I went screaming into the 21st century about electronic filing and now realize it's great because if I wake up at 3 a.m, I can file something if I need to get it done. I don't have to wait until the next day or that day. Just all the electronic stuff, transmission of discovery, receiving orders from the court over the on the computer. Away from that aspect, there seems just to be much more adversarial nature of proceedings. When I was in the public defender's office in Denver, we were friendly with the DA's office. We used to have every year we'd have a softball game, public defenders versus the DA's. Have a touch football game. There was a sense, and I mean this is exemplified. I saw a couple guys couple months ago, really now, ex-DA, ex-public defender from the early 70s, Gary Jackson and Gary Bloom. They're having lunch together. They were friends when they were in their respective offices. Nowadays, I don't see public defenders or defense lawyers and DAs sitting down and having lunch or talking about things. My personal perception is the DAs tend to treat older lawyers with more disdain, I think, as though we are completely inept and incompetent, and which may work to our advantage because when you go to trial, you've been there, you know what's going on, you've done it a few times. But I just don't like the lack of decorum. I don't like the lack of respect. I don't like the lack of whatever that
collegiality, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a good word.
In the big picture, we're all attorneys, and I can probably think of just a couple of times I've had lunch with a DA since I've been in private practice. But when I was in the Marine Corps, I was a defense attorney, I was a prosecutor. We switched at one point. And, I could call up, my buddy and say, hey, George, let's go for a run over lunch. And we talk about cases and we'd resolve them. You can prove this, you can't prove that. Why don't you give me this? Or, maybe you're right, I'll dismiss, or something along those lines. And now it seems like it's tough to even get a phone call from a district attorney. They all want an email sent to them.
And they don't respond to emails.
Exactly.
So there's very little communication going on. When I moved to Glenwood in '75, and picture going from a town or a city of 500,000 people where you're having several thousand felonies filed every year, and I don't know how many misdemeanors, but I think in those days it was maybe 2,500 felonies being filed in Denver, to an area where Pitkin County filed less than 100 felonies in a year.
Yeah.
Garfield County filed probably in the range of 100 to 150 felonies in a year. And Rio Blanco County was, if you had 24, it was a crime wave. So picture going into that setting where the most serious thing you might come across is cattle rustling or an assault when somebody gets drunk down at Doc Holliday's on a Friday night. It was a whole different setting. And yeah, you did hang out and you were friends with the other side. You did socialize with them because it's a small town. There was no place for you to hide and isolate yourself. Certainly the defense lawyers were more of a cliquish group, but there was never to the exclusion of the prosecutors. Yeah.
You got along.
Yeah.
And my experience even to this day is like, people don't like, oh, you're just friends with the DA, you're trying to help. No. If I can get along with the district attorney, they're more likely to listen to me. Don't get me wrong, there's a time we have to go poke fingers in people's eyes and say, we'll see you in trial. But most of the time, it's in our client's best interest to try to get the best deal that we can, which comes from them listening to us and saying, hey, you've never lied to me before, you're a straight shooter, but I'll give it to you.
Yeah, here we are 50 years later from the inauguration of the Public Defender's Office. 50 years ago, the brilliant people that we dealt with as clients always referred to us as a public pretender. Mm-hmm. 50 years later, you still hear the same words.
Yeah.
You still hear, oh, they're in the pocket of the DA, they're getting paid by the same whatever. 3 generations later of defendants, and it's still the same stupid crap comes out of their mouths. It's amazing to me.
Yeah. And, I've had people that call and say, oh, I want to hire you, because I got this public pretender right now. I'm like, oh, really? Who's that? Oh, and they'll say a name. I'm like, you're in good hands.
Good lawyer. Yeah.
He's a great attorney.
Yeah.
I stole half of my stuff that I use from him. He's a great attorney.
Mm-hmm.
But people just don't get that. They just have this perception. The problem is they're usually being told what they don't want to hear, but what they need to hear, and they don't like it. So they're trying to find somebody that will tell them what they want to hear.
Sure.
So it never ends. It just seems like it. No. The only thing that changes are the names and the technology, so to speak.
That's it.
Because when I started private practice in 2000, we still got VHS tapes. And now everything's digitally downloaded.
Yeah.
So it's, even that's changed for us, where it's just the technology and the amount of paper because they can generate so much paperwork these days.
It went from it went from the DVDs to CDs and whatever to now where you just there it is. You download it if you want. You print it if you want. You do whatever it is, and you don't have to leave, you don't have to get out of your pajamas. Everything's great.
Yeah. No, I mean, you can literally watch it everywhere from your iPad.
Yeah, take it on vacation with you.
Yeah, work 24/7, which is also a problem. So we'll get to the Ted Bundy stuff, but how did you become the appointed district attorney? I mean, the DA at the time was fired or charged for misappropriation. How did your name rise to the top of people that went from the public defender's office to the district attorney's office?
I knew somebody who knew the governor pretty well, and I had made it known to that person that I was interested in becoming district attorney. I had a wife at the time who thought that that would be a prestigious thing to do, and I let her rationale cloud my judgment. So I applied when there was the opening. I applied along with a bunch of other people, and the three names that went to the. No, there weren't a whole lot of people that applied. Let's be honest about it. There was me. There was a guy who sat on the jury who convicted my predecessor. Well, yeah, that's a little strange. And then there was a guy from Aspen who had been around for a long time, but he was from Aspen. The 9th Judicial District is divided into 3 counties. Garfield County, which I always talk about as being the fulcrum on a balance beam. Mm-hmm. Pitkin County over here, which was in at least a century ahead of everybody else, and Rio Blanco County, which was a century behind everybody else. Nobody from Pitkin County was going to be able to win the election because the numbers didn't tabulate that they would win. So you needed somebody who was more centrist than either of the other 2 counties. And it was either me or the guy who sat on the jury. And that didn't go well. So he didn't. What happened was when the previous DA, Frank Tucker, was convicted, the governor appointed somebody. And then that person had to stand for election 4 months later because of the next general election, which was in 1978. So I ran against the guy from Aspen who didn't get the appointment initially, and he lost. Then had to run again in the next general election where you would normally have run. So that would have been 1980. And I was elected in 1980. Then nobody ran against me except a cartoon character from the Aspen Times. It was the big thing here because nobody liked my drug policy. It was the first time there was a drug policy. But then in 1981, I started getting letters containing threats against my family, and at that point, I made the statement that for $31,000 a year, it's just not worth this crap.
Sure. And so you resigned, or?
So I resigned. 5 months later, they appointed Milt Blakey, who was a really good lawyer. He happened to have been the DA on the Bundy case. He was brought in by Frank Tucker because nobody else in Frank Tucker's office had ever seen a murder case.
Really?
So they brought Milt Blakey in from Colorado Springs, and he did a good job. He's a very good lawyer.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the Bundy case. We're talking about, 1977, I believe, is when he, or 1975 is when he...
I met him in 1976.
1976. You're running the public defender's office up there in Pitkin, Glenwood,
I was
Springs?
the public defender's office.
You were the public defender's office of one?
There was one plus a secretary.
Okay. And so how... obviously he gets arrested, you get appointed. Did you have any idea who this guy was? I mean,
What happened was the guy who's running for election for DA, Frank Tucker, was making a lot of noise about Ted Bundy. I don't know where he got the information about Ted Bundy. I don't know what his source of information was, but he was making a lot of noise about Ted Bundy. We're going to bring Ted Bundy back here and try him for murder and blah, 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 killing Karen Campbell. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. So I contacted Raleigh and said, this is what's going on here. I think we should head it off at the pass. Somebody should go talk to Bundy. And he said, you want to go over to Salt Lake City and talk to him? So I flew over to Salt Lake City, and his lawyer from Salt Lake City, John O'Connell.
That sounds right, yeah.
Picked me up. We went out to the penitentiary, and on the way out, Mr. O'Connell was talking about Ted, and the natural question is he ever been evaluated by a mental health expert? And he says, yeah, I was evaluated, and this is the result of the evaluation. And we met with Ted, and I walked out, got back on the plane, flew back to Colorado, thinking to myself, this is weird. It's just really weird crap that's going on. The most interesting thing about meeting Ted Bundy was that Gary Gilmore, I don't know if you remember the Gary Gilmore case, killed the motel owners, and he was in an isolation cell in kind of like an area where everybody walked by awaiting his execution. So it was like, okay,
really?
so here's two big-time murderers in one day.
A lot of people describe Ted Bundy as very charismatic. He was intelligent, articulate. He had started law school at some point, didn't finish. What was your first impression of him?
Well, I didn't have many of those reactions.
Okay.
I just thought that he was a very strange individual. Certain physical characteristics strike you, I think, if you've been doing it. I mean, at that time, I had only been practicing for 7 years, but I thought I was at the top of my game. I had tried probably a dozen murder cases already in Denver by that time, and thought I knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
And when I met him, he reminded me of a guy that I had represented in Eagle County, a guy by the name of Delmar Spooner. Some names you never forget.
Sure.
Delmar Spooner had been convicted of killing a state patrolman up in Routt County, and he was tried, and he was not tried, sorry, on another killing of a game and fish guy down in Eagle County. But he had been in prison for years on the first conviction, kept sending his letters to be tried, and whatever. Anyhow, he came to Eagle County on a motion to dismiss for failure to honor his demands to be tried. And his eyes were so far set back in his head that you almost couldn't see them. They were just really deep set. Ted's eyes were the same.
Really?
They were dead. It was like, people describe looking at the eyes of a shark. They were dead eyes. It was like Manson kind of eyes. And that was the most impressive thing that I walked away with. Ted didn't, when I met him, the idea was, keep your mouth shut, don't say anything to anybody, don't talk to the press, don't talk to anybody, tell them you have a lawyer, period, end of story. Basic advisement that you give somebody in jail pending filing of charges. I didn't pay attention to whether he was intelligent, charismatic, or anything else until later, and everybody kept saying, "Oh, he's so intelligent. He's so this." I don't necessarily agree with that assessment.
Yeah, I've had clients, lots of clients over the years. And not that I'm the smartest guy in the world, but a lot of clients think they're always smarter than everybody else in the courtroom. And everybody else is an idiot, and that kind of thing. Was he that kind of smart?
If you watch that Netflix production, mm-hmm. in the last installment, he's in Florida. He fires his lawyer. Mm-hmm. He's going to represent himself. And he gets up and he starts asking questions. And then they flash to one of the experts who's commenting on what he's doing at the trial. And people are just almost in a state of shock. Here he is burying himself. he is just asking questions that you should never be asking. He is doing everything he can to get himself convicted, basically, not knowing that that's what he's doing. Yeah, he was that kind of smart.
That kind of smart. He outsmarted himself, and
Yep.
he didn't know what he didn't know, so he didn't know that he was actually burying himself.
Couldn't refrain from showing the world how smart he was. He's smarter than everybody else. And my question has always been, in response to, was he a smart individual? If you're looking at the death penalty in a state that excels in executing people in Florida, would you be representing yourself if you were smart?
No. I mean, it's the old adage that, he who represents himself has a fool for a client.
Yeah.
And I just never, ever understand why people would do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I still learn something, every time I go to court or trial. You know what I mean? I don't know everything, and
no lawyer has ever tried a perfect case.
Never. That's what they call it, the practice of law.
And that's it,
And to keep going and say, oh, I'm going to, like I said, do a death penalty case, because he's been to the law library. He's got this all figured out. And I don't know about you, but I never thought, what they teach in law school is just enough to be dangerous.
Yeah.
It isn't until you get out there and actually try cases that you actually start learning stuff to be a lawyer. And they don't teach you that in law school.
They don't even teach you where the door to the courthouse is in law school.
Yeah. They're teaching you how to write a brief to the Supreme Court and format it. And, that's just, as a trial lawyer, I mean, I've now last week filed my second brief for writ of certiorari to the United States Supreme Court in 25 years.
Yeah.
Twice.
And I've never done it.
Yeah. But yet in, law school, they make everybody think they're writing to these appellate courts. Like, it's so unrealistic.
And I've been admitted to the U.S. Supreme Court since 1972.
Yeah.
I have no intention of going there, especially with the latest appointments. I have no intention of ever going there.
Sure. And so, I mean, at some point, did you think to yourself, hey, this Ted Bundy guy, like, hey, he's not the smartest guy. Everybody keeps saying it, but that's just their perception, and he probably fed off of that. Did you ever think or look at him and say, he's just evil? I mean, you said the eyes look dead. But did you say, wow, this is he's a bad guy?
No, I never gave myself that luxury.
Okay.
You know as well as I do, we don't judge guilt or innocence. It doesn't make a difference. In our practices, the question is, can they prove it beyond a reasonable doubt?
Exactly.
Guilt or innocence, that's not my it's not my realm. I don't deal with that. Obviously, there's not every. Let me rephrase that. Not any one person is innocent. I mean, they may not be guilty of the crime charged. Nobody's innocent. We've all done things in our lives that constitute an absolute screw up of some sort, and that we regret. So I don't ever look at people as being innocent or that. Clients, can they prove it? If you can't prove it, screw it. That's the name of the game.
Yeah, and when I was younger, there was always, there was a line. There was black and white. And as I get older, there's lots of shades of gray. Yeah. And as you progress, and particularly in this law, type of law, you see people at their worst moments, where they've made a mistake. But for the most part, they've lived a very upstanding life, and for whatever they had a bad day, their world is crumbling down, and it just kind of, and there's some people out there that are always, they're horrible people, they're this and that and everything else. And I've had people, and I'm sure you have as well, sit across the desk and say, I can't believe I've had to hire someone like you. I'm like, well, what's that? I mean, it can happen to anybody. People just don't realize that you sit there in judgment, and yes, people do bad things, but people have to be punished for those things, but people don't really, it can happen to anyone, and it can happen to their family member, their good friend, out of complete blue. And, have a little sympathy. There's a story.
I mean, how many judges do we know that we've known over the years get busted for a DUI?
There's some on the bench right now that have multiple DUIs.
So, you live a good life. It's not an exemplary life. You can live a good life. You make a screw up. There are people who are pure evil. There's no question about it.
Sure.
But I can't allow myself the luxury when I'm representing somebody to think to myself, this is a purely evil individual.
Yeah, exactly.
It impedes your ability to represent them.
You're defending their rights.
And that's exactly right. You're defending the Constitution. You're defending their rights, period. One at a time. That's all you're doing.
We're in the trenches every day, and we defend the Constitution on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Because usually the other side, the government, is trying to figure out how to get around those limitations on their power.
Yep.
They never get up and say, "Ooh, you know what? I think we just need to pull back a little bit." They're always trying to, how do we get a little more power? How do we ask
this question about citizenship on the census? How do we do it, even though the Supreme Court says you can't do it? How do we do it?
And if we as attorneys don't stand up, whether we believe in a particular, that's our job. We've been retained to do. We're an advocate for this side, but we are protecting everyone else's rights. I've always said, if we let the government railroad guilty people, they'll start doing it to innocent people as well. And we're that backstop to make sure that doesn't happen, to get up and say, hey, government, you can't do that.
Yeah.
You're exceeding your authority.
We're there. We are there to try to make sure that the system works the way it was envisioned. I can say in the course of my practice, I have never had an innocent person convicted. I've had people who have committed crimes acquitted, but that's the way the system works. The verdict forms don't say guilty, innocent. They say guilty, not guilty. Mm-hmm. And it's done for a reason. That is, they haven't been able to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt to have committed the offense. That doesn't mean that they're innocent. It means that the government didn't have sufficient evidence to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That's all it means.
Yep, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's, people hate defense attorneys. Some people do. How can you do that? How can you represent people?
Easy.
It's easy.
Yeah.
You're defending the Constitution.
I would rather be on this side than being on the prosecution side, sitting back, being self-righteous, and saying, having such tunnel vision that you cannot conceive of how something could possibly have happened. That give this person a break. This maybe technically this is a crime, but in effect, who the hell's harmed by it? What's wrong with that? Before marijuana became legal, and still this particular incident still probably would constitute an offense. When I was DA, in Aspen, marijuana wasn't a big deal. Nobody gave a crap about marijuana. You cared about cocaine, you cared about meth, you cared about whatever other heavy drugs were being used. But there was a guy who was smoking a joint outside the police station in his car in Aspen.
Yeah.
And the cops arrested him. Well, normally I wouldn't pay attention if somebody was smoking a joint, in the privacy of who cared? Who cared if they were smoking in the park and there was nobody around? But when you do it outside the police station, you're rubbing your nose in it, right? So as a self-righteous prosecutor, we prosecuted him and gave him a deferred judgment to a misdemeanor, unsupervised, the whole 9 yards, as lenient as I could be. And I was still accused of being draconian. I told the judge if I knew what that word meant, I would be offended, but I didn't know what the word meant. We have to, and this sounds self-aggrandizing. I think we are, as a group, the defense bar, we are what separates total control by the government from the constitutional provisions of people enjoying presumption of innocence, things of that nature. Yeah. We are that barricade that stops the government from running over people.
Absolutely. And that's what I love. I know you'll still do, and I take court-appointed cases, and sometimes you're the only person there. He has no family. He can have a serious charge. There's nobody in the courtroom for them. You're possibly the most hated, if not the second most hated person in the courtroom, because you're sitting with this guy. And he or she may have done, terrible things, accused of, and probably convicted of it. But you're the person there for him, the only person that's there in the courtroom for him, and
he may not even appreciate you.
And he probably doesn't appreciate you. You know.
But the point is, you're doing your job, and you take the pride in doing the job well, regardless of how your client feels about you. I'm going to do the job, and if I can win this case, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to prevent the government from coming in with improper testimony.
Exactly.
I'm going to prevent the government from steamrolling this guy, no matter what it takes.
Yep. And you just, like I said, we're there for the client, and every client has a story as to how they got there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And it may not be a defense, but it may be mitigation that should reduce that. And part of, half of our job is, or it seems like, is relaying mitigation to the DA to try and get a better offer. And being when they say attorney and counselor at law, it seems like, some days we're more of a life coach for our clients, and saying, hey, this isn't the end of the world. You don't let it define you. You can move on.
And you're providing counseling. You are providing counseling. You go beyond legal counseling. You get into what you just described, life coach. You become the support system for that individual. Yeah. And again, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. You are not responsible for the result. You carry the message, and you go from there. Yeah,
and it can be rewarding some days. I had gone to the Jazz in the Park, and some guy comes up to me a couple weeks ago. He's like, Scott. I'm like, yeah. He goes, hey, you represented me 12 years ago. And I couldn't remember his name or his face. And he was like, man, I just want to thank you. I'm glad. I know I thought your advice sucked at the time, but I'm glad I listened to you and, really helped me. And, now he's doing, counseling for, keeping at-risk youth from going there. And you think, wow, maybe
that's all it takes.
Did some good.
Yeah.
That day he probably hated my guts. My lawyer sold me out. He's not doing anything for me. But in reality, it was probably the best that was going to happen. And,
those are the ones that make it worthwhile. Keep on going.
Yeah. So let's jump back to old Ted Bundy.
I'm trying to avoid that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So old Ted Bundy, ultimately he makes it to Colorado for
bring him back in January, February of 1977.
Multiple charges.
No, just one.
Just one for the
killing of Karen Campbell.
Yeah. And you're representing him. Was there co-counsel on the case, or was it just
Jim Dumas from the state office was actually first chair because he was from the state office and he had done death penalty cases and he knew all about that.
Okay.
I was actually second chair because I had not done death penalty case, and I was local counsel because I lived in Glenwood. Ted was being housed at the Garfield County Jail in Glenwood, so I was there as kind of a babysitter hand holder.
You could tell him how the judge reacts and the personalities. Yeah. That's always important when you're the new guy in town. You don't want to get hometown, so you better have a local guy there. And so when you're, obviously we don't have the amount of discovery that we did today. They dump everything, they give you everything. Was there a voluminous discovery? I mean,
Scott, I don't remember.
Yeah,
I really don't remember. We knew obviously of his conviction in Utah for the kidnapping of Carol DeRange. We knew of his movements in Colorado because they provided us with paper discovery of gas receipts and that kind of stuff he put on his credit card. I don't remember how thick the file was. I mean, it was all paper discovery.
Sure.
And my recollection is it took up at least one storage box, but that's the best I can remember.
Okay, yeah, and I think in one of those documentaries I see whether it was you or Ted Bundy carrying his box of discovery, and it's not voluminous, but like I said, back then you didn't have videotapes, interviews, maybe audio recordings. summaries of results of interviews, things like that.
Yeah.
Was he eager to participate, assist with you, or was it, acrimonious?
He was demanding. Mm-hmm. He was demanding of my time, recognizing the fact that I still had other cases. I mean, it wasn't like I had the luxury of one client. I still had the caseload of a public defender.
Sure.
I was still in 4 different counties. Ted was one component of what the public defender's office was. He was demanding. Judge Lohr, who was the presiding judge at the time, really good judge, brilliant guy, ordered me to spend, I don't remember how many hours a week with Ted. I was like, well, okay. So I would go to the jail and I would sit with Ted, and Ted would talk about Ted, and never talked about the case, never talked about anything having to do with the case, talked about Ted, and I can't even recall a conversation that we had. I cannot recall the context of a conversation we had. I can't tell you if he ever asked about me in any way. I can't recall anything he ever said about Ted. All I know was all the conversation was about Ted.
It was about Ted. Complete narcissistic type of personality.
Yep.
Like, enough about you. Let's talk about me for a while.
Exactly.
And,
hello, that's enough about you. Yeah. Okay.
And so the judge ordered you to basically go hold his hand. I mean,
yeah.
At a certain point, it's like, these are the facts. Usually they're not that complex.
This wasn't that difficult a case.
Like, what do we need to talk about? At a certain point, client, well, how come you haven't come to see me? Well, what's changed? What is there something new
that I should know about?
Nothing's changed, right? We know our strategy, we know the defense, we know the evidence. We're continuing our investigation. But come hold my hand. I need you to talk to me. Tell me it's going to be okay.
No, but that's what he wanted. I mean, he wanted company. He was alone. He wanted company. He wanted to interact with somebody. He didn't talk about the law. He didn't talk about why he was in Garfield County, with a gas station credit card slip showed that he was in, I think, Glenwood or Rifle. Didn't talk about why he was there. None of those things. He didn't talk about anything. He talked about Ted.
Was it, like his family life growing up, or was it, just how this is a travesty of a mockery of a sham that he's even here, and he's such a good guy? How could this happen? I'm a good guy.
He may have talked about how it was a mockery. He may have talked about that. I honest to God have no recollection of any conversation. It was that important, that I have no recollection of it.
Yeah. Well, so how long was he? He was held in Garfield, and then he went to Pitkin.
They transported him for court hearings. He was never held in Pitkin. Pitkin County was where Claudine Lange did her 90 days for supposedly killing Spider Savage. It had the security of a telephone booth. Yeah. That was it.
Not much has changed at the Pitkin County Courthouse these days. I mean, it's still the same courthouse.
Still the same courthouse.
And I love, those old Colorado courthouses that, they have that character versus these modern metal brick monstrosities.
Subterranean tunnels where you can't see the daylight and you get lost and you can't ever get out of the damn place. Pitkin County Courthouse, and I have said this for years, and I continue to say it. Aspen has to be one of the most beautiful geographic settings on the entire planet. The courthouse is absolutely wonderful from a historic perspective. I haven't been in that jail since 1977. I have no idea what it looks like. I have no idea what's going on down there. I have no interest in going. I've been to small town jails like you have. I'm over that.
I understand. Yeah, not much has changed up there. I'm sure it's changed a little bit, technology, but still the same building, not a whole lot of security. And I had a client that had to do a short jail sentence up in Pitkin, and it was more of like, geez, if you got to go to jail for a couple of days, I could think of worse places to be.
Yeah.
They're going to ask you how you like your eggs cooked in the morning. It's not like you're in Denver and the guy is,
I have a vague recollection of when Claudine was in jail, and I could be wrong, and maybe this is a fantasy that I've created, but that one of the restaurants used to deliver her meals for her. I don't remember if it was the Golden Slope or what it was. I just remember the owner of the Golden Slope, who was a terrific guy, used to make meals for women who were at the hospital delivering babies, so they didn't have to eat hospital food. I mean, he was a great guy, but it was a different way of thinking. That's what I said. They were 100 years ahead of everybody else. We were in the 20th century. They were already in the 21st century.
Sure.
It was just a different place and a different time. The Garfield County Jail was nothing to rave about as far as security is concerned. It was just better than Pitkin County.
Yeah. Now, when Ted Bundy was at the Pitkin County Courthouse, and you all took that recess, and unbeknownst to you and the sheriff, apparently at the time, he had jumped out the second floor window. I saw one of the quotes that you said the sheriff came and asked you,
Yeah.
Hey, is Ted around? And I think your response was,
It's not my turn to watch him.
It's not my turn to watch him.
Yeah, I mean, you know how the courthouse is, the courtroom is. I don't know if it's still the same or not, but you had facing Red Mountain was the courtroom, and then facing Main Street was the library.
Yep.
And they just let him roam around the library. I was out in the hallway having a cigarette. You could smoke in those days. And I didn't have anything more to say to him. I mean, we were in the middle of the death penalty arguments. Jimmy's making the death penalty arguments, and sheriff comes around, can't find him. and Jimmy's reaction was great. He said, that is absolutely the worst reaction I've ever seen to my death penalty arguments.
That he has to escape.
He had to jump out the window.
Had to jump out the window. So at that point, obviously, the Pitkin County Sheriff's Department was a little more active in their watching of Bundy. Now, I think it took, a week till he turned himself in, I think, because he got cold and wet and hungry.
I don't even know if it was a week. I thought he got arrested when he was driving some stolen Cadillac down Main Street. I don't. It took. We left. I mean, the Judge Lord declared a recess. It was around lunchtime. John Kane was up there representing the news media, I think it was, and John Kelly was up there representing the news media, and so we all went over to the Jerome Beer Garden and had lunch, and came back after lunch, and I remember John Kane saying specifically to Judge Laura, "I guess that takes care of the proceedings for the day, huh?" and Judge Laura's looking out the window at Red Mountain. But when we were having lunch, I mean, people were showing up on horseback with their bandoleros and rifles and sidearms and everything else, and thinking to myself, I've just been time warped back into the 1800s. This is
posse
crazy.
is coming to get him. Everybody was deputized.
It was insane. It was just a surreal scene.
Yeah. When he was rearrested, do you have any good explanation as to what he was doing? I mean,
we never talked about it.
Really?
Yeah.
It was just a little interruption in the proceedings.
There was an ongoing perception, more than perception, that he didn't think that either Jimmy or I could do the job. And in the book that Ann Rule wrote, a book called The Stranger Beside Me.
I think, yes.
There's a quote in there that Ted Bundy didn't think much of his lawyers, Chuck Leidner and Jim Duma. And my response to that has always been, well, you never asked me what I thought of Ted. So, after he jumped the DA and I sat down and talked, and I said, are you going to endorse me as a witness? because I can testify as to why he was here and what we were doing and all the surrounding circle. He said, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. So I got endorsed as a witness, and being endorsed as a witness created a conflict. I'm off the case.
So you got to get off the case.
I bought the DA dinner.
And that was your last contact. And so, I mean,
Yeah.
other than you, like I said, his eyes were looked like they were dead. What was your opinion of Ted Bundy?
I share I paraphrase, but I share the opinion of the psychiatrist who examined him, evaluated him in Utah. If you look at sanity, insanity is this 360-degree circle. If you go 1 degree this way, it's the most insane person you've ever come across. If you go 1 degree the other direction, person's perfectly sane. And I think that he may have been 1 degree to the
left.
To the left. I back in those days, I guess I didn't really give myself much of a privilege to quantify my clients as far as how I thought about them. Mm-hmm. I do that more now, but in those days, he's another client. There were very few clients in those days that had any kind of impact on me. I mean, especially if they weren't from the area. If they were from the area and I saw them at the post office every morning, we got to be more friendly, and there was more of a personal relationship. Ted was strictly business. There was never any closeness. There was never any kind of personal conversations or feelings towards him at all. He was number 73 for the year. It was that simple.
He was just the client. Let's go in.
Yep.
Let's defend his rights.
There was another guy that was involved at the same time, not with Ted, but as a result of Ted jumping out of the courthouse window, the guy who got busted for all the drugs in his car. He was a terrific guy. I mean, I really, really liked him, and I thought that he was screwed over by the government. The end result was wonderful, but I really liked him, and I always remember his name. He was a delightful guy with a nice sense of humor, and Ted was just a number. He was.
It wasn't the kind of guy you'd go back to the office and say, "Wow, he's just a really nice guy," and he's being railroaded, and this is just like he's just the guy, and like, I mean, when the judge is ordering you to go hang out with him, I mean. Could you imagine the worst thing ever?
No, no. I mean, he was the basis of some really funny stories, but that's it.
Really? So he never wrote you when he got to Florida and said, "Hey, Chuck, I want to thank you for all you did." Anything like that?
No.
It was
Didn't send me a Christmas card. No pictures from Florida. Nothing.
Nothing.
And it didn't leave a void in my life when he left, when he took off, because there were other people who still were the clients. I still needed to do my work. It's like I have now one less case to deal with. Thank God.
Yeah. And one with the circus that comes with it. So that was probably...
And it was just years later, I guess when he got caught in Florida. Actually, it was before that. There was a suspicion of his extensive violence. There was always an undercurrent, and a lot of it came from Mike Fisher, who was the investigator for the DA's office. Mm-hmm. I mean, he would talk about it, and he would talk about Ted's being a suspect in a variety of murders around the western United States. So there was that thought that existed that this is a really dangerous individual. Mm-hmm. But that was it. That was the extent of it.
You never worried about being in the jail, in the visiting room with him or anything like that?
No.
He wasn't the guy,
No.
Over the years I've had, not so much for me, but I've had associates, females, they'd come back, they'd meet a client, and they'd say,
I won't go see him again.
I can't be in the same room with this guy alone. He just creeps me out, and I take it over, or, we do it together. You never had anything like that?
There was a guy in Denver in 1974 whose name I don't remember. That shows you where he falls in the hierarchy of things. who we were having an NGI evaluation done, and there was one doctor from Colorado Health that did all the evaluations in those days. I don't remember his name. And my guy, he went out to the jail to see my guy, and the visiting rooms used to be on the left of the county jail. Now they're on the right of the county jail, and there's a little red button in all the rooms.
The panic button.
Well, they didn't have those in those days. My guy's being evaluated over here, and he puts a sign up in the window of the door saying evaluation in progress. He then takes the doctor hostage for a very short period of time. Comes into court. Before he comes into court the next hearing, he's found to have a handcuff key in his mouth and a pencil in his pocket, which they're allowed to carry, but it's a sharp and really, really sharp pencil. And the deputy sheriff searched him and found this handcuff key, and they found the pencil, and they told me that his plot was that he was going to kidnap me in the courtroom.
Really?
So I went to the jail and had a conversation with him. And this carried over to Bundy. My conversation with this guy in the jail was, here's where I live. If you ever get out of jail, which I doubt, and I see you in my neighborhood, I will be forced to kill you. It's,
That's simple.
He didn't think that was very lawyerly advice, and I said, it's great lawyer advice.
Yeah.
I'm here to try to help you. You're here to try to, do whatever. It's just not going to work for you.
Yeah.
I never had a fear of Bundy because all his victims were women, and I figured that he wasn't going to mistake me for a woman at the time, so I felt fairly comfortable.
Yeah.
But yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I've had those situations with female investigator. I've had it with a co-counsel on a creepy child molestation case from East Colfax, out in Arapahoe County. Yeah, I mean, those people exist.
Absolutely.
And I think I've always figured if I'm going to get the shit beat out of me by somebody, so be it. But it's going to end up badly for them. And now that I'm old, you have crimes against the elderly. I'm in great shape.
Yeah. We've had some different clients over the years where you just, you make sure that where that panic button is just in case. Because a couple times we've gone.
You're sitting where he's close to the panic button. Yeah. Would you mind pushing that for me?
Well, we've been nose to nose yelling like, this is what it is. Because oftentimes clients, don't forget they have three choices: who their attorney is going to be if they can get counsel of their choice, whether they're going to plead guilty, and whether they're going to testify.
Yeah,
that's it. Everything else we talk with them, but those are generally their decisions. And, you didn't ask this question or, that's going to get you convicted. That's why I didn't ask that question. It's going to open the door. But I know you know everything because you've been in the law library,
And you've been talking to these other law students who were in the jail.
Exactly. And, it can be quite frustrating. I once had a client he didn't like the offer. So he came to my office on a Saturday and he puts a gun on the table, pulls it out from his waistband and says, the offer's going to get better. And I was like, well, first of all, you're going to put that away. Then you and your mother, and his mom was like, oh, my God, what are you doing? But, And yes, and I'm no longer your attorney.
Yeah.
That's it. I filed a motion withdrawal the next day. And my bat that I have right there, I always kept it in my office for those little circumstances just like that.
Yeah.
And so
I remember years ago getting appointed on a case where the previous lawyer withdrew because the guy set fire to the lawyer's office. It's like, okay, I can deal with that.
Yeah. I had a guy once, he attacked went after a DA in the courtroom.
Oh, no.
And he was actually a really nice guy. And he got abused and settled his personal his 1983 case against the sheriff office for the exact amount of his bond. And he never made it back to court because he bonded out and he went on a little road trip and ultimately had a little altercation and, wound up deceased, but he never made it back. But he was actually a really nice guy. And he had one name, which was his real name. And then, but they kept booking him through the process where it was a name on the inside of his jacket. That
Calvin Klein.
That he had. Somebody had written the name, and they said that was your name. He goes, no, that's. And he just got so upset. And he was like, that DA over there, she's trying to kill me. And the judge said, excuse me? And he says, something wrong? You need some batteries in those bell tones? And all hell broke loose. And I think I got appointed to the case because I was one of the only attorneys not in that courtroom that day. I was in the hallway. And I remember it was one particular DA, and we're like, oh, he's really scary. Oh, my gosh. Who'd he go after? They mentioned the name. And I'm like, well.
Was it a woman DA that he went after?
Perhaps.
I was in the old, where they used to do preliminary hearings.
Yeah, old 472W.
And guy with a waist belt and shock things and everything else, and he went after the DA, and she climbed up on the judge's bench.
That's the case.
Same one, eh?
Yeah, and I thought, he must have some redeeming qualities.
I was sitting there, and I'm watching this whole thing unfolding, and people are jumping up and running, and I was sitting there doing my crossword puzzle. So I had to finish the crossword puzzle, but I'm watching it as they're shocking him, and nothing is happening. And I thought, it's really ineffectual.
Yeah. So that was the case where the district attorney wanted to be the victim and the prosecutor on his other cases, and it was up to the Supreme Court. We're trying to figure it out, and they charged assault on a peace officer because the officer cut himself on the hand with his handcuff while putting handcuffs on my client. So they charged him with assault on a peace officer in that case, even though the officer cut his hand. He was actually a really nice guy. He just had some issues, but when you talk to him, you'll never forget him. And he was just generally, a nice guy. He had a story, you know what I mean? Probably a little dangerous, but if he had some medication, I think he probably.
He was all right.
So obvious. I mean, so Ted Bundy sounds like he's just a regular client in the shuffle of everything.
I mean. Let's assume for the sake of argument that O.J. Simpson had not been a professional football player and had a big name. Would he have been something that would have made the news and they would have made movies about and broadcast on television? No.
Probably not.
Ted Bundy is O.J. Simpson without a football career. He's just another client who is charged with committing a murder. The probabilities are, I believe then, I still believe now, he would have been acquitted.
Of the
murder case in Pitkin County, yeah.
But he just never got back for that because Florida kept him?
Yeah, pretty much. And what it was indicative to me, and maybe this is a wrong conclusion to reach, if he had the confidence that we had, why would he have left? That's I guess an issue that'll never be resolved.
Sure.
There was no eyewitness. The eyewitness to the person standing by the elevator on the night that Karen Campbell went up to get magazines out of her room, she identified a deputy sheriff as being the person who was by the elevator. She didn't identify Ted's. The best they could do was put him in Garfield County. And I don't know that in itself is sufficient to establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. There was no DNA at the time. There was no scientific testing being done that could establish that Ted was the person who committed the murder. They never charged him with the other 4 missing women in Colorado. They never charged him, even though, in my mind, he is probably responsible for those people as well.
Sure.
And I came up with a number of 60 just out of my head, off the top of my head, that he was probably involved in the murders of that many people.
60, you think, huh?
That was my number. I don't know where it came from, but that's the number I came up with, and I'm sticking with it.
You're sticking with it, yeah. Well, I mean, he was pretty notorious, and so I mean, if the evidence was that weak, basically a bad ID. Being in a county in and of itself is not a crime. How did they link him to that where they would even have enough to get probable cause?
Good question, and I don't have an answer for you. I just think that they put it together that he inferential. He was responsible for Carol Durange being kidnapped. She identified him. They think he was involved in these other killings. Therefore, let's tie him together with this. And I'm not saying he wasn't involved. I don't recall specifically what the probable cause affidavit read. Mm-hmm. I don't recall that there was any physical evidence that connected him. There were no fingerprints that I can recall. Again, DNA didn't exist. There was something after he left that came up having to do with a bite mark in his irregular teeth. Mm-hmm. But then take it the next step, which was that science, which was used in Florida to help convict him, was later disproven to be credible. So I can't tell you what the probable cause basis was, or the what that line was that they crossed to get probable cause.
Which doesn't take much, obviously. And
yeah.
To get there, it's a lot easier to charge somebody than it is to
convict them.
So after 50 plus years of practicing law, what's next for you?
I don't have an answer for you. I'm still doing this, obviously. I'm doing what I enjoy doing. If a case comes along that I have no interest in whatsoever, or that I think that would be overwhelmed by, I'm not doing it. I'm enjoying doing misdemeanors. I'm enjoying doing some felonies where I think I can help somebody. I do that. I can't see doing it at 80. It's just not in my realm of thinking.
But you still enjoy the practice of law.
I enjoy the practice of law. I enjoy going to the courthouses. I enjoy winning, and I don't enjoy the frustrations that come along with trying to explain to a young prosecutor, to any prosecutor, why it is that they're not going to win. I just don't get any pleasure out of that whatsoever. And like we talked about earlier, just that frustration of their tunnel vision, of them not being able to see the other side of the coin.
When you go to county court, or for a misdemeanor or something like that, and the DA says, "This is the offer and that's it. If not, we'll go to trial." And you're like, "Oh, okay." We can do that, I guess.
Yeah.
And because they're vast life experience, they're, maybe 25, 26 years old.
I have
never had
neckties.
a job other than going to school, and now they're a prosecutor, and they're,
I have neckties older than they are.
Yeah, exactly.
And I remember Craig Truman's comment. Somebody gave him that. Well, we're going to end up going to trial, and Craig's reaction was, "Oh, gee, I did one of those a couple of weeks ago and really enjoyed it. So sure, let's do it again."
And Craig, great trial attorney.
Yeah, I mean, this attitude's gone on forever.
Yeah.
And in the public defender's office, the attitude was, if you don't get something out of the offer, then you try the case.
You go try the case, yeah.
And they used to have a stamp that said GORT, G-O-R-T, guilty or trial.
Guilty or trial.
And it was a badge of distinction. You go back to the office, and you'd have written on your public defender file GORT, and it's like, yes,
go for it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, this is still an enjoyable thing. I just find the need to get out more often.
I understand. I think I didn't take a vacation my first 7 years in private practice, because you're working, you're building your practice, you're taking your clients. It's the only thing that matters. And now, as I've getting older, I'm 25 years. It's like, wow, I need a vacation about every 3 weeks, at least a long weekend. It's exhausting.
It is.
It's truly exhausting. I don't think people realize how exhausting it is, really taking care of everybody else's problems, and you don't have time to take care of your own.
And as much as you try to get away from it, I find myself still waking up at 3 a.m. thinking about a case. You can't turn that off, especially when you have a strong belief that your client's getting screwed over.
Yep.
You just can't turn it off.
And you can't. You're sitting in a movie, you're sitting at dinner, and something reminds you of it. And, somebody will tell you, and I try to be better about it now, but I used to always get, you're here, but you're not here.
Yeah.
You're thinking about something else. And
you just can't let it go.
Yeah, it's tough. I try to turn it off before you get home at night, but some days you can't. It's tough. And like I said, how do you stop thinking about when they're trying to kill your client?
Yeah.
That's significant. Or you think, wow, you know what? He didn't do this, or maybe did something a lot less. And why are they being so? Why are they not listening to me? Why am I failing articulating what the point is there? So it's something you just don't turn off. Like, okay, I'm making widgets. I'm done making widgets today, and go home, and I'll come back tomorrow and start making widgets again. It just people. It's literally a 24/7, 365 career, which is why I think a lot of people don't do criminal defense after a certain point, because it is exhausting. People just don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, and I think for your own mental health that it's necessary. Get away, leave your phone. Don't take your phone with you, period. You're out of communication unless somebody reaches you by email and you have your iPad or whatever else. Yeah. And that's fine. I have no problems with that anymore.
I do too. I don't either. I agree with you 100%. So, well, thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
And talking with us.
This was a wider ranging conversation than
Ted
Bundy.
But I just like that. I mean, I love, talking with, attorneys that have been around and done it and kind of seen it all. Phil Cherner came and talked with us.
Good lawyer.
He's a great lawyer, and one of his he's retired and came down and chatted with us, and there's so much knowledge that you all have and experiences that people just don't get. I mean, you guys were here at the beginning of Colorado's public defender system, which is still the best in the country. There's no doubt in my mind.
It's certainly well qualified. There's no question about it.
And you think of the great attorneys that started there.
Yeah.
Yourself, Larry Posner, Phil Cherners. I mean,
Hal Haddon, Lee Foreman, Paul McCormick up in Boulder.
They're all legends here in Colorado, and whether they're still doing criminal or they're doing civil practices, they were trial attorneys at the public defender's office that makes the best attorneys ever.
And Supreme Court judges, Mike Bender, Joe Quinn, Bill Neighbors. I mean, some brilliant minds came out of the public defender's office.
I guess
I'm not one of them, but
anyone can be anyone can be a lawyer. Just about everybody can be a litigator, because litigators don't really go to trial.
Yeah.
But not everybody can be a trial attorney. There's a big difference, in my humble opinion.
And it's nice doing. It's fun doing.
Exactly.
It really is a very rewarding and fun way to make a living.
It is.
As long as you don't let it eat you alive.
Yep. Well, we've known lots of people that have burned out because of it over the years, or even unfortunately, many have taken their lives. They take on everybody's problem. Yeah. It's a tough business. So, thank you for coming in.
Thank you, Scott.
I really appreciate it. It was good seeing you, and don't be a stranger.
Thanks.
All right. Good seeing you.
I don't want to be a stranger.